Okay. So you suggest a fourth option, that is anything that the EU says, but then dropping the cost effectiveness. Was a good one, yeah. And now the green. I did not see many greens. I saw some green. Ivo, I think you had a green one. You had a blue one. Who had a green one? Who had the green one? Nobody had a green one. You had a green one. Okay. To be very honest, I would go for the green one because it's so over encompassing that anything goes. That avoids any debate. So for me, I'll go for the green one. It's a typically diplomatic solution. But anyway, I think we all sort of on the same wavelength. It's nice to be very broad. Sometimes it's also good to be specific. All of the three are basically, okay, they're not bad. Let's maybe see whether at the end of this session we can come up with a slightly nuanced number 4. Okay, without much ado, we talked about nature-based solutions. We have now a rough idea what these are and what these are not, but I think to make it more concrete, we need examples. So in order to have some examples, we have invited Vincent Linderhoff, a dear colleague of mine from Wageningen University. And Vincent is an environmental and a water resource economist. He works at Environmental Research of Wageningen. He carries out lots of research, provides policy makers with good advice, appropriate advice, realistic advice, not always what they want to hear. And he works at the nexus of water economics, environmental economics, and food security and food and nutrition security. He supports all sort of transition processes. He's good. I have the pleasure to hand over to Vincent, who will take us to Ghana and to the Netherlands. Vincent, the floor is yours, and you've got 10 minutes.
I have to be quick then. Thank you. Well, being an economist, This is safe. Does it still work? Yes. Okay. Sorry. Yes, this works. Okay. Well, I would like to start. As an economist, I agree with you that I really don't understand about the cost effectiveness issue in the second definition. I really don't know why it is there, although I'm an economist. I like cost effectiveness, but it's something that puzzles me as well. I will tell you something about the project that we're doing on nature-based solutions. But we do it with a certain purpose because we are looking into nature-based solutions that can help us to find climate resilience and circular food systems. So it's how can it address also the food security aspect. That's the particular aspect that we add to the project. I did it not alone. Cora is one of my colleagues in this project, but also Jeroen Veraert, Wilfred Appelman, and Confidence Duku, amongst others. I will present 2 cases, one for Ghana and one for the Netherlands, where we use the specific approach with the quick scan to see how we can upscale the nature-based solutions, at least provide a part or a puzzle piece, so to say. Which button? Ah. Yes, here it is. So I'll briefly explain the cases after the introduction, and I'll also say something about how we are going to compare these two cases, whether or not we can learn from these cases by comparing them. As mentioned, the key is the food system transformation, and how nature-based solutions can contribute to that. We use the EU definition, so the second one, because it's a bit broader. It takes more dimensions or domains into account, which is actually a good thing. So it's not focused on biodiversity alone, but it's broader. That's also the reason why we picked this definition. But we added also a classification to it. We distinguish intrinsic, hybrid, and inspired nature-based solutions. So the intrinsic ones are the ones which are more, well, part of the, so to say, more focused on increasing biodiversity. Inspired ones, this I feel like a pilot now. Charmant, zou ik zeggen. Where was I? The hybrid system. So that's the combination of the intrinsic and the inspired example, so to say. And of course, you can have lots of debates on when it's inspired, when it's hybrid, or when it's actually an intrinsic example. But it can be helpful. One of the inspired ones is, for instance, at least that's one of the examples I found very interesting, is the termite building in Harare, Zimbabwe. It's a shopping mall which is built in the form of a termite hill, so to say, and it's energy saving. So it's really reduces the energy used for cooling by, well, tens of percent of the energy use. So that's an interesting way of how nature can inspire even the building of buildings. Yeah. One thing I at least learned from the project, this year is the last year that we run the project. It has been run for since 2019. That the nature-based solution is not necessarily the similar thing as a transition of the food system. If you take the definition of the UN, where the nature-based solution is really focused on improving biodiversity, that does not necessarily mean that it has a benefit for the food system, at least not in the short run, perhaps in the long run. So that's also to see, this is a list of forest and landscape restoration examples, and that we just made a prioritization on which types we actually focus in the project. So we did not take all the different types into account, but only the ones which are focused on the agricultural land or combined with forestry. And another thing is that to look into how nature-based solutions can contribute to food system changes, we also take the food system framework and see how the nature-based solution actually impacts the system by just making it visual how these impacts actually evolve. Yes. We have two cases. The first one is the case in Ghana, in the Bono East region, where we look into two types of two types of nature-based solutions. The first one is rainwater harvesting for irrigation, and the second one is the forest and landscape restoration, a particular type of agroforestry. What we have tried to do in Ghana is to come up with a spatial tool to show where the locations of these nature-based solutions might be very interesting options to conduct. And the reason why we do this in this area, it's now still pretty water rich, but with climate change that will change. And it's an area which is the food basket, or one of the food baskets, for the food supply in Accra and other urban areas. Thank you. So what we did is we prepared, we used the quick scan tool in which we include all kinds of information. This information is collected with the help of stakeholders, our partners in Ghana, and they also come up with certain rules how certain factors should be included in the calculation of these suitability maps. So that's also driven by stakeholder participation. On the left-hand side, you see the suitability map for rainwater harvesting for irrigation. So the blue areas, there are not too many. These are the areas which are have a very high probability or are very suitable for forest or for rainwater harvesting examples. And well, the red areas, these are not suitable. You see a very big red area at the right of the graph. That's actually a natural forest. On the right-hand side, you see the example for forest and landscape restoration. These are the areas, the darker green, the more optimal the area is for forest and landscape restoration. And of course, the interesting thing would be, but that's something for maybe a next step after the project, is to see how these two or nature-based solutions can actually also be combined. But based on these maps, you can start a discussion with a larger group of stakeholders to see where actually these types of nature-based solutions could be implemented. I will try. The second example is the water reuse in the Netherlands. A similar approach of quickscan was used for this. It's to make a more climate resilient water supply, where we look into wastewater reuse of food processing industries, for instance, as an example. And the objective is to increase the wastewater recycling, so water recycling, to have a better supply of water at the end and improve biodiversity. And there are actually three types in which we looked at, which are all already performed in the area. It's looking into purifying landscapes like constructed wetlands to reduce nitrogen emissions, etc. Treatment technologies, it can be used before nature-based solutions, and water storage. Yeah. And these different nature-based solutions were also actually discussed with different stakeholders where the opportunities are with the different types of industries, for instance. One of the things they mentioned is that it's not only for increasing water availability, but that you can also have these dissolved substances from recycling sources or resources. So that can also be very helpful. The security of water supply is a very important aspect, but that's mainly for the private sector than for the public, so to say. These are the different nature-based solutions which I already mentioned. We can go to the map. And this is the map where you can see the dots with the different colors, which are the different types of nature-based solutions, the treatment technologies, and the nature-based solutions, the water storage examples. Here in the southwestern delta. And based on the map, you can also see the different colors, and that the colors indicate whether or not the areas are have shortages of water or are water abundant, at least in the present case. And you can see that the water storage examples, for instance, are the areas where now is already a shortage of water. Yep. Okay. Almost done. The next step, what we would like to do is now to see how we can compare the Ghana case and the Netherlands case, especially in relation to, on the one hand, rainwater harvesting for irrigation versus the reuse of wastewater. And that will be the next step, where we use an evaluation matrix with a couple of conditions we're looking at, including also to see who are the enablers. So also look into who are the people we need, stakeholders we need to make this happen, and what the difference is between the Ghana case as well as the case in the Netherlands, and how we can learn from both cases. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Comparing apples and pears, comparing two good cases to make use of. Burning question for Vincent. Not yet. Maybe not yet. Yeah, please, Harko. All right, satisfied? Good enough. Any additional questions? project here, how to actually make these nature-based solutions. Delighted to hand over the floor to Sarah. If you can, do something with that microphone, then. Well, let me introduce you properly. Sarah is a sociologist, but also a tropical crop scientist, and that combination shows already his interest in interdisciplinary science, and I should say transdisciplinary science, because Sarah worked for ages abroad in China, in Tibet, in Nepal. He is a specialist in scaling. I sometimes call him jokingly Mr. Scale, and he has written a book, and the title says it all. It's rethinking the idea and the practice of scaling innovations for development and progress. I'm very curious, Sip, if you're thinking about nature-based solutions and scaling these, what would you think? What do you see?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So anyway, as I said, so I don't know that much about nature-based solutions, but I will be making some critical reflections, and so your role is to decide whether I'm cutting corners here and there or whether I'm making sense. And so there will be some general considerations about the idea of scaling, and then thinking more broadly in terms of scaling innovations, because basically that's in a way the way nature-based solutions are applied also are a kind of innovation in that sense. I will also zoom in a little bit more on the case of strip cropping or diversifying agriculture. Yeah, it still doesn't. Oh, no, it was turned off. It was turned off. It's. I'm not. No, I'm. Yeah, I remember I didn't update this one. I will. So I will tell a bit about scaling in general, and then also look at a more systems perspective on scaling nature-based solutions. But I still think this battery may be down because. Yeah, you can click them on until we get the next slide. Okay, so some warming up to the topic. Yes, from literature. I like this reference in this recent paper, thinking in terms of nature-based approaches more than solutions. Personally, I have a bit of a problem with this whole idea of solutions. Solutions thinking is, we hear it everywhere, but I think a solution becomes a solution in a particular context for particular things addressed, and you cannot have solutions on the shelves. Something becomes a solution and is not in its nature a solution, I think. Yes, next one, please. So another one from this Climate Action Summit, system approaches are key to scaling nature-based solutions. So the importance of a systems approach, I'll come back to that in a moment. Yes, the next one. Designing with scale in mind. So we often see that first we find something wonderful and then start to think about like how could we scale this up. But starting to think about this as you design, because you might design differently if you want something to be applied at appropriate scale. So don't see that as just a mere second phase, but something that needs to affect your design as well. Next one, please. Oh, it comes from, yeah. So there are not the silver bullet, as if, you know, just nature-based solutions by nature are good. It depends on the context. There are wonderful things in nature that, if applied at scale, would lead to terrible things. And this one, I like the expression in this paper, hand in hand with nature. And then the question is, I'll come back to in the rest. But so is nature about solutions? Does nature operate in terms of solutions? I think not. So maybe if you think in terms of solutions, it may be not along the same lines as the way nature operates. Anyway, that's more philosophical reflection. So then some considerations about responsible scaling. So something that is found to be good in a particular context doesn't necessarily work the same way and is a success if applied at scale. And although this seems like, well, of course not, this is often how it's approached. We have this wonderful thing, so if only this is massively scaled, it will solve so many more problems. And there's a problem in that logic. Another thing is that we often see that the means become the end, because the solution, the actions, whatever we call it, the technologies, easily in the process become the sole focus. How do we ensure that this becomes applied at scale? But it's what comes after it. So how does this contribute to a good impact at scale? But in the process, I very often see the thing in itself, the means, become the end, and that's the sole focus. So we also need to think, and that's more the system perspective, when we start scaling one thing, many more things start to move, or the other way around. When we want to see something go to scale, many other things need to start moving as well. Think about electric cars. Just producing many electric cars is not going to work. There's the whole infrastructure and all the other things and legislation, and everything needs to start moving. I'll come back to that in a moment. But yeah, you can go to the next one. Then also in nature, we have diversity. When we start scaling, we get more of the same, essentially. That's the idea. So you may also see maybe actually there's some contradiction there. Scaling nature-based solutions may lead actually to a loss of diversity. So how do we deal with that one? Also, if something in nature is part of a context, it's contextualized. If we take it out of that context and start to scale it up, it's no longer in that context, and you need actually then basically to scale everything that's part of the context with it, but that will be difficult. Nature-based, it's about proportionality. Things in an ecosystem, you'd like to see things in good balance, but actually scaling can draw it out of appropriate proportions. Next one, please. So this is what you might get. Yeah, you can put them all up. Oh, that's a bit too far. So we may lose by scaling. You may get more of the same and lose out of some, or you may pull things out of the proper proportions, or through excessive scaling. This is the Argo Lake. If you use water, it's very nice, nature. But if you apply it too much, you may drain a lake, for instance. So we have to think about the essential process of what we do when we start scaling things. We pull things out of proportion. We may lose diversity. Next one, please. Also, we may assume that if something is good at a certain scale, if we start scaling, we only get better results, as I said before. But maybe the next one is there's a certain optimum. And where is that optimum? So when we start scaling, we need to very well consider also the context, the appropriate context. In which context does it produce the same good results? But also at some point you might get escalating negative effects. And where does that point lie? It's not just gets better the more you apply it. Next one, please. So strip cropping. Oh, okay. Time hurries on. Okay, I thought I had 15. This is not really. Very briefly, you can go to the next. So you can see the strip cropping on the back actually also. So it is growing. Basically, that this is the idea. Rather than having a very big plot, having them grown in strips. Yes, next one. Stroke and tilt Dutch. So there's quite a few positives, but also many things that talking about scaling. Other things scale as well. Labor requirements start to scale, but the other way around. You need custom machinery, irrigation, yields start to scale in a different way. So all sorts of things need to start moving. Next one, please. So that means, so there's many barriers to it, and you can say like, okay, let's just apply more of this strip cropping. But if you want to see that happen, many other things will start to scale with it. So scaling will always be about scaling a variety. It's like a package of innovations, a package of nature-based solutions, but let's say a package of innovations that together need to start scaling, like the example I gave for the electric car. The whole infrastructure needs to scale with it. Next one, please. So there's all sorts of things that you can do, but as you can see, it's not just a simple solution like, okay, we'll just do this and that and the other, and then people will start applying it at scale. Next one, please. I'll skip that because you said I have little time. So this is a very important one. The whole way agriculture works in the Netherlands at this point in time has been optimized around a certain way of doing agriculture, which does not involve strip cropping. So you might at first say like, oh, you know, it's not as effective, not as efficient, and all sorts of things that might make you choose like, well, let's just stay doing what we did. But this optimization took place over many years. So you should anticipate, you should expect that if you want to make this shift, for instance, I'm not saying that this is the only thing, but it requires a new optimization process. And if you expect it to produce, to be as effective as the former way, that's not reasonable, actually. So you need to have time, you need to take time. That's the basic thing, and the government needs to play a key role in this. Next one. Okay, some further reflections. Well, you can. So there's also in literature some more about the importance of looking at the whole system. The next one. So there's lock-ins, but it's part of that same story that I just told. Yes, next one. Next one. So you need to start thinking, even if you want to just look at diversification of cropping systems, say through strip cropping, you have to start looking at the whole system and see what needs to scale with this strip cropping. Some things needs to be scaled down. Some needs to go to scale with it in terms of labor requirements, in terms of the type of mechanization, etc. A system perspective is critical in relation to scaling nature-based solutions. The next one. So then this is about the last one. So many of the world's biggest challenges have to do with scaling innovations in the past. Think about the problems that we're facing. Often behind it is that we started to apply certain technologies, start using certain resources at scale, and that's where we got our problems from. So I think we need to be careful that we don't take nature-based solutions down that same route. So responsible scaling requires thinking and acting from a systems perspective, and not just like this is this wonderful thing, this silver bullet, and let's just massively scale it. That's too simplistic and a reductionist approach. So landscape approaches in agroecological territories, that's a very nice way of approach to in the same spatial area, see what needs to start moving. You have much more of a view of what's happening and how things need to be reorganized so that they remain or come into appropriate proportions. So we need a contextualized solutions, not just standard. And I'll leave it at that because I think I passed way over the time you gave me. Sorry, Cora.
You could maybe honest. Almost structure. That's
Yeah, okay, okay. So that's it. The first thing what came up by me is um, what we have done in the past is that we produce food mostly independent of our natural system. We used to bring the water to it. We used to bring the fertilizer, the pesticides, etc., etc. And so, in my opinion, we should make the connection again with our natural system. And so I agree with Shirp that it should be more an approach than a solution, because it's not really a solution. You still have to find your way therein. So, in my opinion, we should make that connection, and yeah, and that's difficult because and you get more risks because you are depending on the rainfall, on yeah, the natural system. One can produce more than the other. So and then of course what kinds of scale do you mean? Do you scale of farms, landscapes, or regions within a province or whatever? So for me personally, the scale is not a big issue. What I would like to see, that there is a movement that we are going more to a system approach, and that we produce more in that way. And so for me, scaling up is more, yeah, a word that good examples you use for others to inspire the red line of those success stories, to do that in other situations. And I personally work a lot international, and of course we give a lot of examples of our Dutch approach, but I always say, don't copy our policy because it's in our context. So pick up your nice red lines, what you think is valuable for you, and that's the message. So that's what I I fully agree that scaling should be seen in a certain context. Yeah, it's, I agree on that. And yeah, in my opinion, it should start. You could say scaling up is also that you have a vision for a certain area where you want to come from for the long term, and what you do within that vision for that area that should fit. And in my opinion, you should use that natural system as good as possible. And what is good? Yeah, that depends on the circumstances, the local circumstances, I would say. So yeah, that came up by me, and what we try to do, of course, and that's our challenge, that if we make the connection to our natural system more and more, yeah, we can also do something about the biodiversity, about the water use, etc. So you also solve a lot of problems which you have to face now. So back to the natural system. In my opinion. Now, what they should do, in my opinion, of course, this goes not by itself, because what you see that what we are asking from a farmer or grower is that he also serves a lot of public services like climate change, biodiversity, that are public goals. And we think that he will do that by himself. So he needs help in that. He probably doesn't know anything about biodiversity, how to interpret those data, etc. So yeah, in the first of all, he's a grower or a farmer, and that's his key message. It's the same as the industry. You can't have all the knowledge by yourself, and especially when it comes to public goals, which those farmers and industry have to fulfill. So they need help. Yeah, in my opinion, and mostly because if you look at an integrated area, of course your challenges are multiple. So, and you have to find everywhere the solution to fulfill that long-term vision. And in my opinion, that sectoral budgets doesn't fit. You should have a budget for certain areas to get that problems integrated approach. It's a part of the first of all, same experience because I'm feeling But of course, when you make a talk, but of course, in those policy phase, tailor-makes only fits the plus when we have very often back. But I really often that also you should help. Because, and that's what action policymakers practice and call that formula the golden triangle. Bear that, I guess. Oh,
I'll have people demo. I know this is a challenging. I'm so sorry. Okay, back to the mic. Then I was just introducing somebody from Wageningen University who is great in herding cats, who knows how to manage diverse groups of stakeholders and people and colleagues even. Ivo, I would like you to reflect a little bit, having heard so many speakers, examples, and policymakers who say actually policymakers need to learn, need to know what needs to be known. They need knowledge, they need evidence, they need examples. Ivo, what's the role of science in this? Please, Ivo, over to you.
Thank you, Cora, and thanks to the speakers. Yeah, I think the role of science in this one, or research knowledge, is to increase our understanding. That's the first role, especially when you're talking about systems. There is so much more to understand on all different levels. What do we know about the soil biome, for instance? We don't know. That's also part of nature-based solutions. So it's better understanding, but it's also bringing proof points to policymakers, perhaps also to investors, we hear about that later, to make decisions on why and how to invest and use the solutions. Third is monitoring and evaluation. And the fourth one, that's engaging, explaining what we learn, but also engaging in discussions to learn more from practice. And that's why I think we should keep talking about solutions, because in solutions it becomes practical. So approaches are all very nice, but people don't buy approaches. They need solutions for problems. And there is a middle road, of course, but that's why I really like the solutions part, because we as researchers not tend to talk in solutions that often. That's, I think, a step we need to be making every day. Translate the stuff we know, the stuff we've seen, and the people we engage with into solutions that can be applied.
Thank you very much. So back to the solutions. Sorry, sir. Talking about solutions, yeah, we can debate later, but indeed also to offer perspective to those having problems and also giving hope but all the current problems actually can be solved, and that maybe nature offers us the opportunity to solve. That would.
And that's, I think, coming from a water background, I saw that nature knows best. So that's why I believe, but that's a belief, and we need science to underpin it, that we have more resilience, better solutions if we stick to nature as much as possible. But that's why we need proof points for that to underpin. And I saw it happening if you talk about sand engines for the coast in the Netherlands, but it's something completely different than food systems. But yes, that does not apply in the English coast, where you have cliffs. And and it's a story which is true. Some Brits called us and they say, "Can you bring us our sand engine? Because our cliffs are rapidly deteriorating." Well, then a sand engine doesn't work. So it's context specific, absolutely.
Context specific and highly unpredictable. I live in Noordwijk, and they say that because of the sand engines, we have these funny holes that, you know, when you have little kids are playing on the beach and they step into the water and then, oops, they're gone. And they say that's in relation to these sand engines, that somehow the current changes. So there's more studies needed to avoid our kids disappearing into the sea, because then we with solving our problems, we actually create other problems. Okay, so learning from practice, finding solutions. Does that help you, Co, as a policymaker?
I have to speak in the mic, so yes, of course, as policymakers, we need science. It's, sometimes, questions where you need an independent organization to get that answer. Yeah.
Again, the golden triangle. We'll talk later. Maybe we are in business. Ivo, you mentioned the word practice. Also, Co mentions the word of practice. We actually have a great practitioner here in the room. That's Harco. Harco Costa. I think we know each other for the past 20 or 30 years. And you've always been, what they say in Dutch, met je voeten in de klei, always engaged in practice. And I would like to invite you to also take a seat and reflect a little bit with us. Nature-based solutions. How do you do that within SNV? How do you translate that into country programs? How do you operationalize these and implement these? And what is it actually that you need from all the others in the room?
Okay, well, I think what we are coming to realize that in the past 50 years, have been working towards sustainability goals. And with climate change, everything is changing. So I think resilience is the next word beyond sustainability. And for that, we've come to realize that it's not just about increasing productivity, increasing income, and only the economic side of things. So nature-based solution comes there as an approach to build resilience. And I think it goes beyond just building buffers and food security, but it goes about also ways to diversify our economies, our social systems to cope with the unknown, which is the climate we're doing. And I think, inspired on nature, it allows us to come with new solutions and approaches as approach in some way as approach, because reducing mainly the risks of things and affordable for low-income countries. I think in practice it comes to really applying things that we are already doing. That we have learned in the past, like mixed agroforestry system, mangrove restoration, systems, working on drought-friendly crops or drought-friendly crops that you solve with uncertainties, climate smart agriculture, nature positive climate management ourselves as well. These different contextualized approaches. And I think that what we see is it's not one approach that goes finished. Most innovative aspects, innovative happen in research or universities. So you have to innovate every day. But I think how we experience those lessons. So one thing is solutions and not for that I think we look at it. We need to communicate that everything works for it. And I think what has worked very well is working with local NGOs, working with local provinces first, because they are closer to the innovators and are able to adapt that. And once they're proving your case and make most of the business case for the following years, then it's time to think about scaling, and then you come across systems that doesn't enable that. Usually there are policy issues and financial models that you need to break through, or even behavior change. And in every context is different. But I think examples like, for example, in Vietnam, where we are working with trying to bring this proof and concept to the provincial level and try to establish it on the table payment for environmental services, a way to help farmers to go through this transition. Are some examples of how we deal with that within SMB. And finally, I think what we see is also nature-based solutions are very difficult to find because they are difficult to measure. There's not one single solution. So we are also looking for who is willing to fund that. And what we see is there's a lot of funding for carbon. We could talk about mitigation. So we try to kind of be very creative. How can we make mitigation money work for adaptation? And that is, I think, the big challenge because it's not the carbon itself, but it is the transformation that we need to fund, and there's no guarantee that the climate will bring us in the future. So it is about building resilience.
Yeah, building resilience, trying to change systems, making them more resilient is great. But as you say, that requires clever business models. And who is willing to invest in nature-based solutions if they're also contextualized and tailor-made and experimental? So I'm very happy to introduce our guest, Barbara Rademakers. Can you please come to the front and join the panel? There is a seat reserved for you. Barbara works with Oikocredit, and Oikocredit is an impact investor. It's a social investor who wants to contribute. It's been founded by churches, and it's an instrument to really empower people across the world and try to enable them to build a decent life. So I'm really curious to hear from you, Barbara, thinking of nature-based solutions. How do you translate that into financial models and get the finance to those who actually are able to invest, to invent, and to develop these solutions that we need?
So what we're struggling with actually being
that looks very cute and charming. Thank God I'm not on the picture. So as a social lender, what we're looking for is financial and social return. And what we do is, as Oikocredit, we finance microfinance institutions and agricultural partners. We call them partners. We don't call them investees. And those are agri-cooperatives and SMEs. So small and middle-sized enterprises. That's what we are financing. And what we're seeing is that our financial and social return is threatened by climate change, right? And what we're now we don't have the solution because we don't have the knowledge. And what we're worried about is how we can maintain both our returns. And one of the things that we're not alone. We have a group of social lenders that finance both, because most of social lenders only focus on microfinance because that's less risky. And financing agri is not giving financial return. But it gives a lot of social return. So that's why we're financing agri cooperatives and SME. But we've done an investigation with the Council of Smallholder Agricultural Finance. They've run through all our numbers. We're like 10 social lenders, and we do not have financial return, but we do it because there's social return. And what we're doing is, yes, we have social lenders who say we want to reduce food waste. We want to reduce CO2 emissions. But what we're doing, honestly, is we're saying we want you, partners, investees, to do that. And what we're looking at now is how can we support them in doing that, and also how we can improve their investability so that we can keep on investing in these very important institutions, and to have smallholder farmers and other excluded groups maintain access to finance. They lack knowledge on climate change and what affects it. We do know what the effects are. We're seeing them immediately. They're defaults. There are a lot of more risks. Our credit committees are taking a step back and evaluating, and they want to keep on investing. We see all that, but how we can de-risk our investments, yeah, you're welcome to give us solutions. Or ideas. We are, of course, also part of a bigger group of investors. We do more shorter term investments, between 6 months, where we finance coffee contracts. That's the most simple investment. And we've been able to de-risk our investments so that we can go to tenors, to loan, tenors, we call them, to 4 or 5 years. But that's only because we could de-risk our investments. But yeah, there is definitely a big risk, but we haven't found a solution. Besides that, we have a capacity building program where we want to support agriculture cooperatives in improving their agriculture practices. Yeah. Use the mic and put it on your.
Yeah, sorry, Barbara, to be rude, but may I ask you, you're an investor and you're asking us how your financial investments can be de-risked. I would like to throw the question back to you. How do you see society with science, with NGOs, with governments, with consumers? How do you see us helping you to de-risk your investments?
We are looking at working together with NGOs, so where they support the capacity building and improve, the risk mitigation. That's so elegant. On how they can support smallholder farmers in improving their practice. It's also the cooperatives themselves do it already. But yeah, so if that kind of and keeping to support these.
Yeah, I have a question for you, because you mentioned the point of cooperative. And of course, you know that we lost our corporations in the Netherlands. Should we go back to that formula to also do the investments better?
If I'm saying, well, we want the cooperative model is an all Dutch-based model, seem to use them. And you're
Yes. That's what we're doing. I mean, already we ourselves as Oikocredits are cooperating, are seeking cooperation. We have seek cooperation with IDH with the Farm Fit Fund to de-risk to help us with de-risking our loans, our lending practice. And also what we're looking at we're supporting other WASH, for example, WASH projects, and we're also collaborating with Aqua for also We Are, which is a new development in Oikocredit, really looking at working much more together with other organizations, definitely. Yeah.
Sorry for struggling with the microphone. We should have had 4. I see lots of opportunities for debate and many more questions, but I'm also looking at time. Well, we started a bit late, so I guess 5 more minutes wouldn't harm. But we have a 4th speaker. That's actually Leanne. Leanne, could you take the final seat, please? Leanne Zappenfeld. Leanne Zappenfeld works with Climb Eat. And Climb Eat is a new organization. It's a very young organization. It's a great organization. You're closely working with also sort of youth networks and young emerging networks, and you strongly go for the action. So having heard all of us talk, yeah, policy, we need knowledge. Yeah, well, knowledge, we need evidence. Yeah, evidence, well, actually, we need finance. Yeah, finance, but then actually we need to de-risk. And so please, Leanne, from your perspective, how do we get into action? How do we change the world in real terms?
Is this working? Yeah. Yeah, so that's a small question for me to answer. No. Yeah, so Climate is a really young organization. We started in January, but before that, I was also part of the CGR research program on agriculture, food security, and climate change. So I'm also bringing some of that experience, but most of our work is on a global policy level. So the big UNFCCC conferences, UN Food System Summit, those kind of policy spaces. And I think for me, for the past year, the key takeaway has been, like, also listening today, it's not like we don't have solutions or good ideas or however you want to call them. It's the technical solutions are often there. Of course, we still have an adaptation gap and other questions to solve, but in essence, there are already quite some really good examples. But really moving that to action, I think, especially in the agricultural space, really requires also institutional innovation. Past weeks, I've been doing a mapping of all the initiatives in the agricultural landscape, working on climate resilient and sustainable agriculture. And that's part of the work we do on COP26 follow-up with the UK government. Part of the breakthrough agenda, so that's an agenda policy initiative that tries to seek breakthroughs in various sectors, and agriculture is one of them. We also have steel and transport. But if you compare that mapping with the mappings of the other sectors, I think one thing that really stands out is, compared to those, the agricultural space is very, very, very crowded. And then, yeah, so that makes collaboration, I think, in a way, or at least coordination, quite difficult. And then if you also add to that some of, I think, the institutions in the space, especially the older ones or with a long history, sometimes are quite rigid or unlikely to move, or sometimes also embedded in the status quo, right? They have a stake in keeping the status quo. But then the diversity also gives an opportunity for collaboration. But to really get that going, I think we need to get the incentives right, and that's incentives for farmers, consumers, also policymakers, all these organizations. But I think on a higher level, we need to have incentives in our policy frameworks, in our research agendas that kind of inspire bold action, that kind of promote it, that also give priority to bold action, even if it may fail. And also frameworks that allow for critical and humble self-reflection on how our own organizations, we ourselves as individuals, are maybe really doing all the best we can, but also in a way maybe still uphold the current system. So really thinking about, okay, what is my role as an individual, as an organization in that? And I think Climate is trying to do that, to be very critical ourselves, also about the system in general, really getting bold partnerships in place, speaking to people who might not usually speak together, might also not usually talk to each other, like convening them. And also, yeah, be critical about ourselves and yeah, not shy away from challenging the system and ourselves in that. So yeah, that's my 2 times.
That's a bit more than 2 cents, but you're throwing the ball back to all of us. You say that actually what is needed is the incentives for the knowledge agendas, for the policymakers, for the investors. So we're back to zero. Can you be, our policymaker was talking about creating a movement. Now, how do you see the way climate is maneuvering in international circles? How do you see this movement really taking off?
Yeah, so fair question. So I think what we're seeing as Climate as a young organization is that we are attracting quite some momentum because I think maybe we're doing things slightly differently. I think we're trying to be as bold as we can, given the system that we're working in. And I think, I mean, I'm not saying everyone should be like Climate. I don't think we need 200 extra Climates in there. So I think it's also about everyone thinking about what is our role and what's our contribution. And also not shying away from transforming ourselves, right? So doing things differently, and it doesn't have to be completely changing your whole organization or strategy or how you work, but embedding that rethinking and that reflection in your projects, in your work, and talking about failures and the things that don't work openly as well.
Thank you very much. So not just talking about change, but be the change. And then we can all try to play each other's role, but we better start playing our own role properly so that as a system, we can actually change altogether. We're getting out of time, so I would like the audience, any question, any critical remark? Have we learned something today, or is it more of the same? Have we learned something new? Yes, please. Come to you.
Hi, everyone. From here. Okay. Yes. I'm from a country where there is not much policy intervention in agriculture, from Australia. We have a very market-based sector. And this session was a lot about how external organizations like policymakers, like NGOs, like financiers can intervene to maybe enhance adoption of nature-based solution. But I'm interested in how can we scale up what the session is about, nature-based solutions and adoption by farmers who need to adopt them. Having been in the Netherlands for a few days now, I can see evidence that maybe adoption of nature-based solution is not overly popular at the moment. How do we convince the people that we want to reach?
I bet you were on the highway today, like me. Okay, is it a matter of, yes, please. Oops, how do I reach you? Are we convincing farmers, or is our message convincing enough? Or are they about to change their own practice? Or do we all need to change?
Well, I think we all need to change a bit anyway, also in our personal behavior, but we also can learn something from all kind of movements already around us and see how we can connect them or get together with those movements. For example, well, we have agroforestry, which is becoming quite popular and is also well, a good way for agriculture, which is quite resilient. And we see that a lot of especially communities really like this idea because it can be very well be integrated also in an urban environment, and thus also our citizens can be reached. But what we also see is more and more farmers who team up together and just find their own well, consumers to get an actual bonding with them and paying in advance for what they are growing, and they want those farmers to grow in a sustainable way. And also they are prepared to take a bit of the risk because they do not know whether the outcome of this season will be really good. And those are really nice examples, I think, of ways you can share with one another, and which also can be sustained by policymakers and knowledge developers or scientists, of course. So I think we've already got quite some examples that those practices are taking place, and upscaling is also by showing and learning.
Excellent. So the question, how do we motivate farmers? And then the suggestion of, are farmers not scaling the solutions already themselves? And that brings me back to syrup and the strip cropping example. How is the strip cropping going, and how is that being scaled by farmers themselves?
Well, I think we need to talk about it in a different way, because many farmers are willing to do all sorts of things that are, whether it's strip cropping or any other nature inclusive or nature based options. But there's an enabling environment around it. As society, is it willing to pay a proper price for food, etc.? So I think one of the problems is that we put the problem with the farmer, and they need to change their behavior, but we don't want to change, the money that's in our pocket. So that's one side of it. Well, I happen to be involved in some agroforestry work in the Netherlands as well, and there also the contextualization applies there as well. It's not a one size fits all. Many variations of agroforestry, and one thing will work in one place and in another. But farmers are often they're innovative, but they need to have room to move. And so let's not look too much at farmers. Will they adopt? Will they do this? Let's create space for change for them.
Wow, that leads us to a whole different conversation, and I see react.
I fully agree with you, Sjeerd, but I want to bring in another issue, and that's the history.